South Korea. The dark truth about South Korea. Nobody talks about it. On the surface, South Korea looks like a dream. High-tech cities, global pop culture, flawless beauty. But behind the glamour, there's a truth no one dares to mention. A truth filled with pressure, isolation, and a society quietly crumbling from within. Why are so many young people giving up on life? Why is no one talking about the cost of perfection? This isn't the South Korea you see in the travel vlogs of K-dramas. This is the part they don't want you to know. Stick around, because once you hear what's really going on, you'll never see South Korea the same way again. South Korea is over. That might sound like clickbait or an exaggeration, but it's not. South Korea is entering a full-blown collapse, and almost no one is talking about it seriously. This isn't a slow decline. It's a meltdown happening in real time across every front. Demographic, economic, social, cultural, and even military. And what's causing it isn't war or invasion. It's something far more insidious. A total collapse in the number of people being born. For decades, South Korea has been experiencing a fertility crisis so severe it defies comparison. This isn't just bad, it's historically unprecedented. And the truth is, we may have already crossed a line humanity has never dared to cross before. By 2060, the South Korea we know, the K-pop giant, the tech titan, the soft power supernova, may no longer exist in any recognizable form. Not because of outside forces, but because of an internal vanishing. People disappearing from the inside out. And what's terrifying is how few are willing to acknowledge the scale of the problem. This is the real population bomb. The one no government wants to admit is already exploding. To maintain a stable population, a country needs a fertility rate of about 2.1 children per woman. In the 1950s, South Korean women were having 6 kids. By the 1980s, it fell below 2. In 2023, just 0.72, the lowest fertility rate ever recorded in human history. In Seoul, it's even lower, around 0.55. That means half of all women in the capital will never have a single child, and the rest, only one. And these numbers aren't just abstract. They're the math of extinction. If this continues, 100 South Koreans alive today will leave behind only 36 children. Generation by generation, the country is fading out of existence, and no one seems to know how to stop it. Or worse, no one's really trying. Those 36 kids, they'll have 13 of their own, and those 13 will eventually have just 5. In only 4 generations, 100 South Koreans shrink down to 5. That's not a metaphor. It's basic math. And when we look at South Korea's population pyramid today, this dystopian future already feels eerily real. For every 1-year-old alive right now, there are 4 50-year-olds. It's a pyramid that's flipping upside down. After more than 40 years of ultra-low birth rates, the warning signs have been quietly building. But until now, the consequences have remained mostly invisible. Right now, South Korea's population is still at an all-time high. So is its workforce. Its economy is still growing. Its global influence still strong. But that's exactly what makes this moment so deceptive. Demographic collapse doesn't hit with a bang. It creeps in like a shadow. At first, you hear a distant hum, like a train somewhere far off. Then suddenly, it's on top of you. And by the time you feel the impact, it's too late to jump out of the way. South Korea is seconds away from getting hit full force. So let's fast forward 35 years into the future to the year 2060 and take a look at the country's fate. When it comes to population forecasting, the go-to source is usually the United Nations. They present 3 future scenarios: low fertility, medium, and high. But here's the catch. Every time the UN has used the medium scenario for South Korea, they've been wrong. Every single time. Always too optimistic. Just between 2022 and 2023, South Korea's fertility rate dropped by another 8%. So in this video, we're going with the low fertility scenario, the one that's been the most accurate and the most alarming. Under the UN's low fertility scenario, the most realistic based on what we're actually seeing, South Korea's population will fall from 51 million today to just 36 million by 2060. That's a loss of 15 million people in a single generation. But the drop in raw numbers isn't even the most terrifying part. The real crisis is in who disappears. It's not the elderly, it's the young. The working-age population, the people who power the economy, pay taxes, serve in the military, start businesses, raise families, they'll shrink by 40%. At the same time, the number of elderly South Koreans will double. You'll have more retirees than workers, more funerals than births, more hospitals than schools. And this is not some sci-fi projection. It's already starting. By 2060, for every 100 people in their 20s and 30s, there will be over 120 people above the age of 65. A society like that simply cannot sustain itself. Who's going to build the roads, staff the hospitals, defend the country? Even the most basic functions, from farming to caregiving to innovation, will face labor shortages on a scale no country has ever seen. And here's the kicker. No country in history has ever reversed a fertility rate this low. Not one. South Korea is now venturing into completely uncharted territory. And yet, despite the alarm bells, despite the forecasts, despite the mathematical certainty of what's coming, there's a strange silence. No real plan. No national mobilization. No emergency measures. Just quiet denial. It's as if the country is sleepwalking straight into demographic extinction. Let's pause for a second. Everything we've said so far is based on projections. And the future, of course, is a strange and distant place. But let's go there anyway. Let's step into the world of 2060 and take a look at what South Korea will look like if the current trends continue. First, the shape of the population itself. The pyramid will be flipped completely upside down. The country's total population will have shrunk by nearly 30%. 16 million people vanished. Gone in just 35 years. And what's left behind will be the oldest society in all of human history. Half the country will be over the age of 65. Less than 10% will be under the age of 25. And just 1 in 100 will be small children. Imagine waking up in a city where the streets are quiet, not because it's peaceful, but because they're empty. No laughter, no playgrounds, no school traffic. Whole neighborhoods, entire cities, abandoned. A society where half the people are elderly, many of them living alone or crammed into overwhelmed retirement homes. Meanwhile, a shrinking minority, younger, exhausted, and overworked, is left scrambling to keep the system from falling apart. This isn't just emotional. The consequences are real and brutal. Economically, things start to break. In 2023, an already shocking 40% of South Koreans over 65 were living below the poverty line. But by 2060, that number might look optimistic. Today, South Korea holds one of the largest national pension funds on Earth, around 730 billion US dollars. Impressive, right? But here's the catch. It's projected to stop growing sometime in the 2040s and be fully depleted by the 2050s. A ticking time bomb, not just for retirees, but for the entire system they depend on. So let's talk about what happens in 2060, when the pensions come due. By then, South Korea's massive national pension fund will have dried up. That means pensions will need to be paid directly by the working population. And here's where things get really bleak. Experts say a functioning pension system needs at least 2 to 3 workers per retiree to stay afloat. But even if we're being extremely generous, assuming every single South Korean over the age of 15 is working, the country will have fewer than 1 worker for every retiree. That math doesn't work. The burden on workers will be unbearable. Taxes will skyrocket, services will collapse, and poverty among the elderly won't just be widespread, it will be the norm. But that's not all. Millions of seniors will be forced to keep working just to survive. The problem? There may not be any jobs left to offer them, because by 2060, the South Korean economy itself could be in free fall. Here's the simple truth. The size of an economy is tied directly to the size of its workforce. You need people to make things, and you need people to buy them. Today, South Korea has around 37 million working-age people driving a $1.7 trillion economy. But by 2060, that number will be cut in half. Just 17 million workers left to carry the weight of an entire nation. Yes, productivity will probably increase. Technology will help. But even if every worker becomes drastically more efficient, even if productivity outpaces anything we've seen in recent decades, the country still hits a wall. All projections suggest that South Korea's economy will peak sometime in the 2040s. After that, a slow-motion crash, permanent economic decline, a shrinking economy, a shrinking population, and no clear way out. Some projections are a bit more optimistic. They say the recession might not hit until 2050. But here's the problem. Those forecasts are based on the UN's medium fertility scenario, the same one that's been wrong again and again. And there's no real sign that South Korea is heading in that direction. In fact, all current trends point the opposite way. Another key part of economic strength is innovation, science, technology, fresh ideas. And guess where that comes from? Young people. It's young adults and middle-aged workers who invent, build, create. They're the ones who push societies forward. But in 2060, that creative engine will be running on fumes. And with fewer people working, tax revenue collapses. The government will be caught in a brutal paradox. On one hand, it needs to take care of a massive elderly population. On the other, it's bringing in less and less money. It'll be forced to make impossible decisions, cutting hospitals, slashing social benefits, gutting public services. Infrastructure only works when enough people are using it. Once towns and rural communities become too small, the government may have no choice but to abandon them altogether. South Korea will start to shrink inward, concentrating its population in a few dense metropolitan areas, while everything else slowly fades away. Worst of all, there'll be no money left to invest in the future. That's bad enough. But what might happen to South Korean society, to its culture, to its very soul, could be even worse. Predicting the future of a society is hard, but some trends are already clear, and they're deeply unsettling. Today, about 20% of South Koreans say they have no close friends or family. 1 in 5 already. By 2060, half of all Koreans aged 70 will have no siblings. Nearly a third will have no children. Young adults between 25 and 35 will make up just 5% of the population, and most of them will have no brothers or sisters. What does that mean? An epidemic of loneliness on a scale humanity has never seen. The elderly will be isolated, the young will be few, scattered, disconnected, and this will be even worse outside the big cities, where social networks are already thin. At the same time, the cultural energy of the country, the one that gave us the Korean wave, will start to die out. Back in 2000, there were 17.5 million South Koreans between 25 and 45. They made up 37% of the population. This was the generation that gave us everything. The pioneers of K-pop, K-dramas, K-cinema, K-fashion, K-food. They launched South Korea onto the world stage and turned it into a cultural superpower. But fast forward to 2060, and that age group, the 25 to 45-year-olds, will shrink from 17.5 million to just 5.6 million people. They'll make up only 16% of the population. And with them, the cultural heartbeat of a country will begin to fade. Already, traditional arts are dying out because older generations can't find enough young people to pass them on to. As youth vanishes, traditions vanish. Rituals, festivals, crafts, music, they'll all slowly disappear. Without the next generation, the soul of South Korean culture will begin to dry up and wither away. And on a personal level, what will it actually feel like to grow up in this future? What will youth culture become in a society almost entirely made up of seniors? Picture going to school in 2060, except there are no schools, no kindergartens, no classmates, just rows of abandoned buildings that once echoed with life. What kind of job prospects will exist for young people when entire industries are gone and entire regions have collapsed? What will politics look like when the elderly make up the overwhelming majority of voters? In a desperate attempt to find connection, young people will flock to Seoul and a handful of other cities. But for many, the only real option may be to leave the country altogether, to immigrate, to escape. That means even fewer young people left behind. Meanwhile, rural areas will rot. Small towns will die. And just like we're already seeing in Japan, as where nearly 10 million rural homes have been completely abandoned, large parts of South Korea will vanish from the map and be reclaimed by nature. Forests will grow over old roads. Animals will return to places once filled with people. And here's the kicker. This all happens while South Korea is still technically at war. North and South Korea never signed a peace treaty. And by 2060, that fragile situation might still exist. The question is, will South Korea even be able to afford a military? Today, 5% of men of combat age serve in the armed forces. But in 2060, it would need to be 15% just to keep that number steady. and that assumes there's still enough young men to draft in the first place. Okay, pause. That's a lot to take in. It almost sounds like science fiction. Is there really no way back? No solution? But that's the problem with demographic collapse. Once the freight train hits, it's already too late. It's not just unstoppable, it's irreversible. Let's say something miraculous happens. Fertility in South Korea suddenly triples, jumping to the replacement rate of 2.1 children per woman, and stays there. Even in that fantasy scenario, by 2060, the population pyramid would still be completely upside down, an inverted triangle balanced precariously on a shrinking barrel. There would still be just 1.5 working-age people for every person over 65. In other words, even in the best made-up future, South Korea still has to pass through a long, dark tunnel, an unavoidable demographic bottleneck, before any kind of real recovery is even possible. But here's where, strangely enough, a small seed of hope exists. Yes, the current situation is terrifying, but recovery in the long run is still technically possible. If South Korea acts fast and makes deep, society-wide changes that genuinely encourage people to want to have children again. And there may be signs, however small, that something is starting to shift. In 2024, for the first time in 9 years, births in South Korea actually went up by 3%. It's not much, but it's something. The real question is, can that trend continue? And to answer that, South Korea has to face the uncomfortable truth, the real question, head on. How did it get this bad in the first place? Because this collapse didn't come out of nowhere. In general, as societies get richer, better educated, and safer, people start having fewer kids. That's not new. But South Korea isn't just following that pattern, it's supercharging it. No other country has taken this logic to such an extreme. South Korea escaped poverty in record time, transforming itself into a global powerhouse. But in the process, it created something brutal, a hyper-competitive, work-obsessed society that's running on stress and burnout. Officially, the work week is 40 hours. The legal maximum is 52. But in reality, unpaid overtime is a given. And in 2023, the government actually proposed increasing the limit to 69 hours a week. That's not a typo. And what's the reward for all this overwork? Surprisingly low wages and a cost of living that's through the roof. Housing in big cities is wildly unaffordable. Education is expensive, not just schools, but the endless private tutoring needed to get into top universities. And while families are under massive pressure, South Korea still spends less on family support than almost any other rich country. Then there's the culture. Traditional gender roles, outdated expectations, and rigid social norms make everything worse. In South Korea, if you want kids, first you have to get married, because having them outside of marriage is still considered unacceptable. If a couple in South Korea wants to start a family in 2023, they're already swimming against the current. Only 4.7% of babies were born to unmarried women, one of the lowest rates in the developed world. That's how deep the stigma runs. And inside marriage, the situation doesn't get much easier. Out of all rich countries, South Korean men do the least amount of housework and child care. That means women, if they want to keep their jobs after having kids, are forced to do it all. Work full-time, run the home, raise the children. Meanwhile, Men are cracking under the pressure of another outdated expectation, being the main breadwinner and living up to impossible career standards. So in the end, starting a family is a personal choice. And more South Koreans are saying no thanks. Because the truth is, South Korea has built a culture that's simply incompatible with raising children. A society that's too stressful, too expensive, too rigid, too punishing. The result? A system that naturally produces fewer and fewer kids. And this isn't some far-off dystopia. Demographic collapse isn't coming. It's already here. And it's not just South Korea. In 2023, China's fertility rate was 1. Italy and Spain, 1.2. Germany, 1.4. The UK and the US are slightly higher, both at 1.6. That sounds okay, right? It's not. A fertility rate of 1.6 means that after just 4 generations, a country will have 60% fewer people. At 1.2, you're looking at a loss of 87%. And here's the kicker. These rates are still falling. There's no sign of stabilization, no sign of recovery. And maybe the weirdest part of all of this is that barely anyone in power seems to understand how serious it is. For the last 100 years, we were obsessed with the idea of overpopulation. That was the global narrative. So today, if you say we actually need more kids, you sound weird, like an alarmist, a relic. But the math doesn't lie. The future we're heading into is so surreal, so extreme, that it feels impossible. It's hard to believe it's real, because it's never happened before in human history. That's why low birth rates are mostly discussed in terms of worker shortages or pensions, never as the full-blown existential threat to our societies, cultures, wealth, and entire way of life that they really are. But unless we take this seriously now and fundamentally rewire how our societies function, unless we make raising a family something people actually want to do again, the rest of the 21st century won't just be hard, it'll be bleak, for everyone still here to witness it. Because the demographic freight train, it doesn't stop. And it's not in the distance anymore. It's barreling straight toward us, right now. Here's a scenario almost no one is talking about. One that goes way beyond birth rates, pensions, or lonely grandparents. If South Korea's population collapse continues, we might be witnessing the slow death of a modern nation-state. Not metaphorically, literally. A functioning country needs 3 basic ingredients: a population, a territory, and sovereign control over that territory. But by 2060, South Korea may no longer have enough people to maintain any of those. Not enough workers to power an economy, not enough young men to defend its borders, not enough taxpayers to fund a government. That's not a dystopia. It's a vacuum of power. Now, here's where it gets even more chilling. South Korea is surrounded by geopolitical predators: China, Russia, and of course, North Korea, all with more people, more patience, and long-term ambitions. As South Korea shrinks, its strategic vulnerability grows, its influence declines, its military thins out, its control over remote regions weakens, and nature, or rather neighboring superpowers, hate a vacuum. This isn't science fiction. It's the first stage of what could become a quiet, bloodless takeover through cultural dominance, economic dependency, or political pressure. No invasion required, just time, low birth rates, and a society unwilling to reproduce itself. A global cultural powerhouse, fading not with a bang, but with a demographic whisper. Most importantly, it's easy to see just how differently this issue is being approached around the world. A government-backed outlet in Slovenia, for example, pointed out that Europe is actively considering immigration as part of the solution, while countries like Korea, Japan, and China are deliberately avoiding that route altogether. This kind of contrast makes it easier to understand the big picture. It gives you a more honest, balanced perspective. And maybe most importantly, it empowers you to come to your own conclusions. Because the future is coming fast, and no one's going to solve it for us.